Hello, everyone, and welcome to ITE Manitoba's webinar on transit planning in Winnipeg. I'm Stephen Florco, and I'm the president of the ITE Manitoba's section. Before we get into the presentations, I'd like to go over a few brief announcements. So first of all, CITE is hosting a virtual annual conference from June 8th to 10th. There's no main topic for the conference, but it's going to cover a lot of different areas, and there's probably something for everyone. You can find out more about the conference at the website listed at the bottom. Next off, we are excited to be beginning planning for the 2023 CITE conference. So Rebecca Paterniak and Mark Hearson are going to be the co-chairs for the local committee, and you can stay tuned for more opportunities to volunteer with planning the conference. We have a new executive for 2021. Mark Hearson has joined the executive as treasurer, and the existing other people have moved up in positions. So Jennifer Chapman is the past president. I'm the president. Rebecca Paterniak is the vice president, and Steve Wood is the secretary. We also have our Key in Lieu student paper competition that's currently ongoing and accepting paper submissions. Submissions are due by May the 14th. The top 3 submissions will also do virtual presentations to a panel of judges, and the winner will be chosen based on a score on the paper and the presentation. So entrants must be members of the U of M student chapter. We're also looking forward to a fundraiser event happening in the fall or the summer. So stay tuned for more information on that. So we have 3 presentations happening today. The first will be from Kevin Sturgeon from Winnipeg Transit. Next, we'll have Graham Masterton and Bob Kurilko from Stantec present on the consultant side. And then Teresa Platt from Winnipeg Transit will have the concluding presentation. So each presentation will run about 15 or 20 minutes. And after each presentation, we'll have a 5-minute question period. You can type your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar buttons on the right side of the screen. So I will see those questions and I'll read them off to the presenters during the question time. So our first presenter is Kevin Sturgeon. Kevin is a transportation engineer and senior transit planner for Winnipeg Transit. He has over 15 years of experience in multimodal transportation planning, policy, design, and standards development in the public and private sectors. Kevin is a user of several modes of transportation and believes that communities benefit from enabling individuals to choose the mode that suits them. Kevin, I'll pass control to you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks. All right. I see we have 42 attendees, so thanks everybody for coming. I can't see who you are, but thank you to all 42 of you. Why are we doing a Winnipeg Transit Master Plan? We have a number of issues, or we had a number of issues, some of which went away with the pandemic related to crowding. But otherwise, we have heard from our customers that our network is very confusing. I'm showing an example of half of one route, only half of it. This route, the southern half only, or on the south side only, has 5 different places it goes. So you have to make sure you get on the right bus or else you'll end up in the completely wrong part of town. We have this example all over the place. We have another example where one quite common trip on a straight line down Portage Avenue from downtown to Unicity. If somebody says, how do I get from downtown to Unicity? You would have to say, well, what time is it? What day is it?
Hey, Kevin, sorry to interrupt. We're actually not seeing your screen in presentation mode right now. We're kind of just seeing the full PowerPoint screen with all the menus and stuff.
That's interesting because I'm seeing it the other way. Oh, that's a screen issue.
There we go. That's better. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay. I guess I'll have to look the other way. Can you see me? Am I on camera right now?
Yep, we can see you fine.
I'm gonna have to turn to my other screen then, because I guess that's the one that it's showing on. So I won't be looking at you 43 people anymore. Sorry about that. So anyway, we have a really confusing system. People moving into Winnipeg who aren't familiar with it can't figure out where to go or how to get there. And we heard a lot about that. And we also have had some serious capacity constraints prior to the pandemic. And we can't easily just solve them because of this incredibly complex nature of our network. And with the example I'm showing up here, you know, if we have a capacity issue on sort of the mainline part entering downtown, it just can't realistically be solved within the resources that we have by, you know, we'd have to put service on this whole thing that you see here, and that's just not feasible. And that's just one route among many. Okay, you know, this is just another example of the sort of current status of our network. This is our current downtown network map. It's not actually a network map, as you can see. It's a map of streets that have transit and bus stops that exist. But then each bus stop, you know, needs to list the routes that serve it. If we tried to map this by drawing out where all these routes go, it wouldn't fit. You wouldn't be able to map that. It's so complex. Almost every route we have goes downtown. Almost every route that goes downtown kind of meanders around downtown through many different ways through downtown. It's just so incredibly complex. And it makes it hard for transit to serve one of the purposes that transit should be for, which is sort of medium distance trips through the center of the city. Something that's just a little bit too far to walk. And Winnipeg's downtown is quite large. So that would be a demand, and we're just not very good at solving that at least on an intuitive way that people can understand. So this was the process of the Winnipeg Transit Master Plan. We had parallel processes of public engagement and technical work. I'm mainly going to be focusing on the technical work within the service plan, which was the phase 1 technical work. So this is the result. So after 2 years of study and consultation, we came up with a completely new transit network. From 2019's network, there is nothing the same. We took a big step in 2020. In April 2020, we opened the Southwest Transitway bus rapid transit system, and we redesigned the network in the southwest quadrant of the city to match this general direction. Or I'll say we're 95% of the way there in that quadrant, and then the rest of the city will be doing in the future if this is approved by City Council. Can you see my cursor?
Yep,
Yeah, we
we
can
can
see
see it now.
Okay, just want to know if I'll be able to point. I want to focus now again on downtown. So downtown is a pretty illustrative example of what we've done citywide. We've taken the downtown network that's unmappable. We've taken bus stops that had up to 29 different routes serving them, and we've streamlined that into what we call Winnipeg straight lines. You can't draw straight lines in Winnipeg, but we've tried our best. And this is the result. There's a few things in here that are pretty deliberate. There's at least 2 routes on each street. All routes that go downtown will be frequent. That means at least every 10 minutes in rush hour and every 15 minutes the rest of the day. And so where they overlap, that would be cut in half. So every trip downtown within the greater downtown area will be in straight lines as much as possible, and quite frequent, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. So those medium distance trips across the city center are one quite significant improvement that people will see. And so building on that, and more generally speaking, we've created, or we're proposing, now I have to, I guess, repeat, this has not been approved by City Council. It's going to City Council later this month. So everything I say is a proposal at this point. But we're proposing to introduce a service classification system to formalize this. This has not existed in the past. And it is comparable, since we're all, or I think most of us on this call are transportation engineers. We're familiar with classification system of the road network. This is similar to that. So we have 3 classifications in what we call the primary transit network, and then 5 classifications in we call the feeder transit network. The differences are basically, it's about what should a customer expect. So the stop spacing and the frequency define the differences between those. Only primary transit lines will go downtown. As much as we can, only primary transit lines will go anywhere that there's significant congestion and source of uncertainty or delay. And the reason for that is, well, there's two ways to address uncertainty and delay. One is high frequency. And it doesn't matter if your bus is on time. You're not looking at the schedule in the first place, so you don't even know if your bus is on time as long as it comes right away. That's the main strategy we're taking with downtown. Make sure everything's so frequent, no one's looking at a schedule anyway. It doesn't matter if the bus is late, as long as the buses are evenly spaced. The feeder network, which is lower frequency, would stay out of congested areas like downtown, and that in that way it would be more reliable. This is sort of a schematic of how they connect. I want to, or I've highlighted or circled the one of our classifications of bus stops. So we're also proposing to classify the places where you can get on buses into 4 classifications. We already have lots of bus stops and we have some rapid transit stations. We're introducing or proposing the concept of a transit junction and a mobility hub. I'm going to get into more discussion of the junction concept a bit later. So here's a highlight or a section of our proposed new network. I've highlighted the Route 16 example that I showed earlier. So the streets that the Route 16 serves today are highlighted in yellow, and then the proposed new network is shown in the rest of the map. So what you can see is that for the most part, the same streets are served. There are a couple of exceptions. But the difference is that the meandering parts that do have, there's a reason that the bus goes there. There are destinations there. But they have a different function than the mainline parts on the straight major roads of the city. And so in the same way that those roads are classified differently as local, collector, and arterial, we classify the transit service distinctly and provide higher frequency, more reliable service on the major roads that where the service travels in straight lines. And then we provide feeder network connections in the other areas. That does mean that some people will have to transfer where they don't currently have to transfer. And so that's where the transit junction concept comes into play. There's another concept that I'll introduce, but I'm not going to get into, and I think Teresa will later, called the family of services model. So Winnipeg Transit Plus is the paratransit service offered by Winnipeg Transit for eligible customers. Right now, it's quite difficult to use on short notice. So spontaneity is lacking for the customers of this service. In this model, to free up resources and make that spontaneity more, or to make it more possible, for whoever for who has the ability, and a lot of Transit Plus customers do have the ability to do this, we would pick them up at home and bring them to a nearby junction or station or hub. And then they would transfer onto the conventional transit service. And then at the other end, they may get picked up again in a Transit Plus vehicle. So it's a first mile, last mile problem, and a specific solution to that problem for customers of a certain range of abilities. People that don't have the ability and that really need door-to-door service would continue to have that available. So what is a transit junction? Well, it's basically a bus stop pair or more than two. It's two or more bus stops that serve two or more routes. It's quite simple in concept, and there are probably hundreds of locations around the city that would count as transit junctions. We have a accessibility standard and in the city of Winnipeg that describes how to build a bus stop with a concrete platform, where to put a bus shelter, a bench, and other amenities, and so on, to make sure that it's accessible. What we don't have, or what we didn't have, is the ability, or the formal ability, to look at how pairs or collections of bus stops near each other interact with each other. But that's a really critical component of accessibility. If you have a perfectly accessible, as in it meets all the definitions, checks all the boxes in the checklist, bus stop, but people need to walk or roll 400 meters to make a transfer, then that's not accessible. Doesn't matter how perfect the bus stops are. So the transit junction concept groups the bus stops. So at a typical street corner, there might be 4 bus stops going in each direction. And it groups it, it gives us the language to group those 4 together and then look at how they interact. Here's an example of a bus stop that's not at all pedestrian friendly for accessing it, but if you happen to need to make a transfer here, it's actually pretty good. Just based on where the routes go, there's a clearly dominant transfer, southbound to westbound as an example. So you could come on the southbound bus. The green dots are the bus stops, so get off at that one. You don't have to go anywhere else, and the westbound bus will pick you up at the same place. So the dominant transfers, and if the platform is accessible and the shelter is accessible, then it's an accessible bus stop and also an accessible junction. Non-dominant transfer, now sometimes there's not much you can do about the roads themselves. These are just large roads, and that's that's a fact. But there's no extra walking. If you happen to need to make the non-dominant transfer, the walk is minimized to the extent possible. It's not excellent, but really is, I think, probably the best we can do in this context. Can we use this as a Transit Plus drop-off, though, for the family of services approach? No. Here's another example, and this particular intersection is going to become extremely important in our new transit network. Unfortunately, the location of the bus stops is not great, and this was recently rebuilt, so there's not an opportunity for the next generation or so to do any work on this as part of another project. So so we're going to have to look at how to solve this problem as a future project. But the bus stops are quite removed from the intersection. The islands are not consistently large enough to install bus stops on the island. The transfers are in the 180 to 200 meter range. That's a long way for some people. Keeping in mind that some people might already have walked 200, 300, 400, 500 meters to access the bus in the first place, you know, their first bus. And then this is in the middle of their journey where they have to do some more walking. So this would be an example of something we need to fix. I'm talking to all of you about this now because I recognize that a lot of you are people that I'm going to be working with over the next little while. Some of you I'm already working with on various road improvement projects. This is an example of one that I'm working on right now with probably some of you, where we have two routes that cross. The way that they cross is that one has a bit of a jog. That's line T in red here, and then the other one goes in a straight line. Right now, the placement of the bus stops on, just as one example, on this one labeled line M, where it crosses line T the second time, there's a current bus stop, but it's on the far side, southbound far side. So by moving that near side, it would let that stop serve both routes. That would enable people to go between line M southbound and line T westbound by getting off the bus, not moving, and then getting on the next bus from the same stop. So that's always the ideal. If somebody can get off one bus, not move, and then get on the other bus, that's best case scenario. So the 4 black dots show, you know, sort of best case scenario where you could minimize the most walking or the most impact to these transfers. But there's implications to this. The one opposite of the one I was just talking about, so the first northbound bus stop, some people would need to, so say you're going northbound on line M and you want to go westbound on line T. So you come to that bus stop, you get off, you cross the intersection using one crosswalk, and then you get on at the other bus stop. Pretty straightforward. The problem is there's no crosswalk there. The streets there have a dual left, and Winnipeg doesn't like to put crosswalks crossing dual lefts. So so even though it's directly across, if the crosswalk remains absent, then people would have to cross, in this case, because it's a T intersection, they'd have to cross 2 streets, 2 major streets to get across the street. If it was a 4-way intersection, they would have to cross 3 crosswalks. And that is not a very accessible solution. So, you know, this is one in the early stages of conceptualization, but it illustrates some of the considerations. And so, you know, we'll have to, as the design progresses, we'll have to talk about whether there's any other options for placement, whether there's any other options for crosswalk location, and what the risks are. One thing that we'll all, as engineers, have to keep in mind, I mean, imagine if we put these in like this and didn't put in that crosswalk because it's a dual left and the crosswalk wouldn't go there. Well, somebody gets off the bus on one side and they see the bus coming the other way, and then the light turns green to cross east-west, and they can see their bus coming. What do you think they're going to do? What risks would you take if missing that bus that you can see coming might get you fired? you'd probably walk across despite the lack of crosswalk. So it's not a very simple problem. It can appear simple, but it can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. Sometimes we need to really innovate. This is Confusion Corner. This is long predates the concept of Transit Junction, but it is where we borrowed the name from. So this has been called Osborne Junction for a long time. And now we're expanding that concept. It may not be obvious to everyone, but you know, this internal slip lane colored in red, it's actually quite brilliant. I mean, this is from decades ago, but if it wasn't there, now, sorry if some of you, I don't know if other people have joined from not Winnipeg, but this is confusing enough already, and I'm not going to go into all the details of how this whole thing works. But if it wasn't there, buses going down Pembina Highway southbound and buses going westbound on Corridon, where would they stop? If you stop near side, you could have a common stop, but Pembina buses couldn't use it because they've got to get out of that lane too quickly. So then you'd probably put it far side on Pembina. But that's pretty far away from these northbound bus stops, really far, and plenty of cycles, light cycles, signal cycles to get through this whole maze. By putting it in the middle here, by cutting away in the island and putting a transit stop where it's quite unconventional to do so, both those buses, westbound and southwestbound, can stop at the same place. People making transfers between them can do what I described as being the ideal scenario. And people transferring to northbound or straight southbound on Osborne have a minimum of walking and a minimum of crosswalks to navigate. So this is very old, but it works really well. And then it also allows that transit priority. And maybe some of you who used the bus going to U of M while you were a student might have thought that this was only about transit priority. And I have no idea what the designers of this decades ago were thinking. But transit priority is good, but the transfer connections and the universal accessibility of it, I think, are one of the bigger success stories of this particular design. And that's all I have to say. So I'll pass it off to Graham or Bob.
Thanks, Kevin. That was great. It's really interesting to hear the benefit of the junction idea, and it'll be interesting to see how it works out with the different conflicts between the needs for junctions and, like you mentioned, with the signal phasing for dual left turns and the practice normally of not having crosswalks across that. So moving on, our next two presenters will be Graham Masterton and Bob Kurilko. They're both from Stantec. Graham is the Global Transit Planning Lead. He's located in the Victoria, BC office. Lucky him. He has over 33 years of experience in the transit industry, working at 3 different transit agencies. Those are Calgary, TransLink in Vancouver, and BC Transit. And he's also worked for 2 Olympic Games. Those are Vancouver and London. He currently works on transit, resort, and venue projects across North America with a focus on transit and multimodal integration. He was the co-creator of the frequent transit network concept in Vancouver with Jarrett Walker. Bob Kurilko is known to many of us. He is a senior transportation engineer at Stantec in the Winnipeg office. He has over 40 years in the transportation field, both in public service and private industry. He remains a significant contributor to many iconic projects around the city of Winnipeg. He continues to be involved in transportation planning for many major development projects in and around the city, across Manitoba and into Ontario and Saskatchewan. He has roots in traffic operations and traffic engineering and he remains a strong advocate for designing roads that reflect the context of the facility and for embracing technology in the planning of transportation facilities so that they meet the needs of all users. I had the privilege of working with Bob at the start of my career. I learned a lot from him, and I look forward to seeing him and Graham present. So Graham and Bob, actually just Bob, I will let you take it away.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So I'm gonna show my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, great. Thanks for the introduction, Kevin or Stephen. Yeah, it's been a good ride. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use technology to and data resources to sort of, I guess, address some of the questions of how transit network can better serve the population, or a portion of the population that rely on transit for their daily needs. The population that don't have access to vehicles for running their day-to-day errands, that rely on transit, take them to work, the doctor office, or to for groceries or other necessities. Okay, slide switch. That's recent mugshot. Had the introduction already. One of the things Kevin touched on already is that, whoops, back. How do I go back? All roads lead to Portage, Maine. It's the current system is very downtown focused, and somewhere over 30 routes stopping at some stops in the downtown. What we heard from the stakeholders with that, when that responded to our questions, was that the system is very unreliable, confusing, difficult to make use it for time-sensitive appointments, especially if you had to transfer between routes to get to your destination. So a lot of unreliability built into it, and we heard a lot of that. And we heard a lot of people responded to our public engagement process. 6,000 online, 1,000 direct in-person engagements, over 32 opportunities, and we had over 700 people on our email list. So we heard from a lot of people. We had access to a lot of data too. We used cell phone location-based data. We had the APC data from transit. We had a lot of mapping in the public engagement process where people pinpointed what they wanted to address. And we needed a way to kind of put all this data together. So we used GIS, location-based data, and created a sort of a data link. And what's the right word I'm looking for? Anyways,
dashboard. We created a
dashboard. We created a dashboard. Thanks, Graham.
Custom dashboard
to sort of manage and track all this stuff. And this is the basis of it. This slide sums up the location-based data, indicating the home-based trips in red. So that's where people are living. Blue are the work locations. And of note, even though there are high concentration in the downtown area here, University of Manitoba is down here, airport. There's a lot of other work areas that sort of spread around St. Boniface, North Transcona, Inkster Industrial, out by the racetrack, that really weren't served very well by transit directly. And this slide shows some of the location-based data results. We divided the city into sectors. You can see that on the map to the left here. And And this chord diagram shows that significant number of trips occur internal to a sector, and that the trips destined to the downtown actually are only a small portion of the total trips that occur on a daily basis. So we all kind of intuitively knew that, but this really showed that, graphically that, okay, not everybody's going downtown. People are going other areas of the city. And the current transit system was very downtown orientated. So we needed to find a solution for that. We also mapped the movement between the subsectors. And this is an adjacency diagram. And when I first saw this, my first reaction was wow, because when you change the criteria, this whole box moves like a Borg thing. I don't know. But each sector was separated in subsectors. And the subsectors were actually composed of TAZs from the city's traffic model. So we tied in that way. But it does show, by color here that, there's certain movements that are very high frequency, a lot of people going to them, and others along the outside of the cube where there's not as much interactivity. So it led us to focus on, okay, how do we make sure that we're connecting these people quite well and adjust our transit system to that movement. You can
probably worth just sort of mentioning that one of our common sort of self-beliefs is always that two neighborhoods or communities situated next to each other have to be connected. And using this adjacency matrix, you could click on any one of these subsectors on the we affectionately called Bob zones on the left-hand side, and it, as Bob said, it would remorph and put that as the priority, and you'd actually be able to see if there was any connection between two neighboring areas, or in fact, if there was no relationship and they just happened to be next to each other. And when you look back at what Kevin presented on how we altered some of those routings that were once all tied together and separated some of them, this is where some of that information came from.
Yeah, and there's some barriers between some of the neighborhoods too. Even though they are close, there's a river or there's a railway crossing or there's some other barriers. So even though they are together, there is no interactivity. This map shows the bus stop. This is from the APC data that we got from transit, and shows bus stop activities. And a lot of rich information was provided on that. Total activity, boardings, lightings. You can read the list here. So every bus stop was mapped. We could separate that by routes and find out how much activity on some of the routes at some of the bus stops, and we identified, okay, yeah, a lot of activity happening here. What's going on? So we can identify where transfers are being made by this information. So, and it also identified the bus stops that aren't being used. So, the spacing on the bus stops is pretty close in some areas, and located in areas where there's no connectivity, no good sidewalks or whatever. So, very little activity on the sidewalk. So we were able to identify that. Another focus that we were able to do with the GIS was map services. Where are people? Where do they need to go? So this is a map of grocery stores in the North End, and currently this is also existing. Bus routes are mapped on there, the red lines for the most part, and population density. So we could correlate all those, and we had to make sure that these facilities, these services were accessible by transit for the most part. So we looked at that through that lens to see if especially the community level feeder network, that people can easily get on a bus and make the short trip via transit to get to the services they need, doctor's appointments. Kevin talked about the simplicity of or complexity of the routes, and one of the complaints we did here was, I don't know where these routes go. I don't know how to access them, and I don't want to sit on a bus going through a neighborhood when I don't have to. So these are the complex routes. This is existing system. Lots of complex routes, lots of compound routes, not so many simple routes. And this is where we ended up with our projected or proposed network. No complex routes. Everything is as straight line as you can. The local feeder routes, we identified as being compounded at the worst. And then our primary network are basically very simple. They go from point A to point B along the along the most logical routes that we can. So we simplified it a bit. Service layers, Kevin talked about this a little bit. The rapid lines, right down to accessible and on request. So we layered the services just so that it makes sense. You know what kind of service you're getting in your neighborhood and whatever. So. And in order to address some of the trips that didn't have to go downtown, we ended up with this primary network. For instance, the Route P, which is one of the ones that are identified as the future, goes from Kildonan Place along the east side, down Plessis Road, through Sage Creek, down Ward Avenue, St. Mary's, across a potential bridge over the Red River into the university and down into St. Norbert. So it avoids the downtown. O is basically the same from Red River College, through the west end of the city. Route W, again, Red River College through the north part of the city, and picking up these neighborhoods, making that cross river connection where we can. Another interesting one is U. Again, sort of midtown through the north end, down Selkirk Avenue, I believe. But again, tying into the Transcona. So not necessarily going downtown, but connecting these two neighborhoods. So that was a very important part of our planning, is how do we get people so they don't have to go downtown and add to that congestion, save time on their trip so that they can, I guess, comfortably choose to take transit as opposed to driving. Another thing we heard was regarding safety at bus stops. So a lot of our rapid transit routes, we moved the service into the median. A couple of reasons for that. One is, for ease of mobility, for one. Some of them we had to run contraflow, so it just kind of worked out better. But one of the primary considerations was safety of their users. Lots of people kind of hanging around on the street corner in some of these, some of the neighborhoods that we take rapid transit through. Just people were uncomfortable waiting for buses along the sidewalk, adjacent to bars, adjacent to, different areas that some people might think sketchy. And there's a history of problems in some of the downtown bus stops that we're all aware of. So we moved it to the median, and this allows people to, the only people that actually want to be there or should be there are the ones that are waiting for a bus. So it was just a comfort level for some people. So, you know, that was another thing that we looked
Bob,
at. That
yeah. Before you go on to the next one, I think it's important when we were looking at this primary network, and these are the rapid transit lines, the 5 extra corridors that attach with the southeast corridor or the southwest corridor, that one size doesn't fit all. So we really took the approach. This is why you see so many different cross sections and plan views. Is we knew that different areas of the city have different requirements, and therefore they needed to have a different way of approaching it. So you know, we've created different, basically each different segment was looked at what fits, which one of these cross sections fits best with the existing roadway, what's the safest, what makes the most use, and then how do we transition at the next segment to whatever's best for that segment. So you might see on some of these corridors where it may transition from the curb to the center, and it may run in counterflow direction, and it may then transfer back to a curb at some point. So it was really an approach, again, overall, and I think it's a more of a unique approach that Winnipeg's debuting, is that notion of really understanding how to fit it into the context of the city and do what is right for that area, rather than just sort of taking a one size fits all to the entire corridor.
And this is just a picture of a typical median station. You know, we would probably have heated shelters incorporated in here someplace. The other issue we heard was how to integrate changes to Transit Plus so that we can improve the integration of transit service so people have more options for traveling. Kevin dealt with this briefly, but you know, those that can will be encouraged to chain their trips using a combination of Transit Plus and regular transit. You know, this will be made possible because regular transit will be more reliable and serve more areas with direct service. And that's it. There's a lot of issues presented by the public, and we tried to incorporate as many as we could. A lot of them were very good ideas. Nothing that, not too much that transit wasn't already aware of, but it was nice to, you know, to hear it from the public. You know, the new system provides good community service for access to local amenities. It provides service between areas of the city where, you know, right now automobiles are the only way to move around. So we're providing another option. The reliability is increased significantly because you know, we're reducing the congestion downtown, and we're also you know, not having the buses that have to go downtown wind around through neighborhoods. It does meet transfers, but you know, at very high level bus stops. So using data from location-based data sources and transit, we're able to develop a good understanding of how people want to move, and we're able to, I hope, help the city develop a transit network that will serve Winnipeg for many years going forward. So turn it over to the next, or questions.
Yeah, thanks, Bob and Graham. So much data to go through there, and it's cool to see how it comes together and you get recommendations based on it. So we have one question around that issue, and the question has to do with the community context analysis, and we're making modifications based on that analysis. Did we just look at the current ridership data, or did we also consider some kind of growth model where, like, very car-based communities might switch a portion of their trips to transit? And if so, how was that considered?
Can I answer that?
You can, yes, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah.
We looked at current transit ridership because that's what we have, but we also looked at anonymous cell phone data which is some of the information that got into the matrices that Bob was presenting, came from cell phones, not transit. So it represents all mobility, blind to the mode. And we've made a lot of our specific location decisions based on that data. We don't know what mode they used. We just know that a cell phone went from A to B. But sorry, are we? I think I want to be respectful of Teresa, and I know that she still has a presentation to deliver. So I think maybe we could pause questions till she does that.
Yeah, as long as Teresa gets started by 2 o'clock, we'll be good.
Okay, I can probably just add quickly on to Kevin's statement is what we also created in the feeder network was a transition. So you start off a community as on request, and as demand builds, you move up the layers so that it can react real time to that demand in the future.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. So we'll move on to Teresa. So Teresa Platt is a clinically trained healthcare provider with the City of Winnipeg. She is currently the acting manager of the Client Services Division at the Transit Department. Teresa has dedicated her professional career as a leader in the cross sections of healthcare, regulatory, and transportation industries. Her work has been published in professional journals, presented at various conferences and symposiums, and lectures at the University of Manitoba for the Department of Occupational Therapy. As an investigator for a professional regulatory body, she has expanded her knowledge of advanced investigation skills and procedural fairness. Take it away, Teresa.
Thank you. So maybe to give you some context as to why I'm the one non-engineer in the room, OT, occupational therapy, is the study of human occupations, and I'm just going to pause here to show my screen. Maybe give me a heads up if that is clear to you.
Yep, I'm seeing it.
Okay.
Seeing your desktop.
Sorry?
Seeing your desktop.
Okay, not helpful. Thanks, Kevin. For you, did you just switch screens?
Yeah, I had my PowerPoint showing on both screens, and it was the opposite one as I thought.
Okay, that's probably what's happening for me too. How's that?
That's better. Actually, not quite. We're on the, we can see your next slide and your notes as well.
Okay. Supers. Any luck?
Yeah, we're seeing your PowerPoint now with all of the menus.
Supers. Okay, well, for the sake of time, I'll proceed with this. I'm not sure how to take this part out, but.
Yep, this is good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so occupational therapy is the study of human occupations, self-care, productivity, and leisure. Whether it's a congenital situation from birth, just gonna move this. So a child learning to play, or an individual with a newly acquired spinal cord injury. The goal and the purpose of occupational therapy is to enable each person to achieve optimum function and adaptation in performing their occupations. When I look at the values and the profession of engineers and how you apply principles through mathematics and science to develop economic solutions to technical problems, I think our professions need to talk more. Through this brief presentation, I hope to illustrate the union of this function, active outcomes, and how and where we should begin discussions. So transportation draws from the unique skills of our mutual professions, not only from an accessible or a universal design perspective, but through societal planning processes, whether it's municipal, provincial, or on a federal level. Certainly here at our transit department at a municipal level, Winnipeg Transit is comprised of paratransit and conventional services, providing public transportation. The paratransit service, as you'll see in the slide, is Winnipeg Transit Plus. You may know it formerly known as Handy Transit. And it offers services to individuals with disabilities who are unable to use the conventional service, whether that's a 40-foot or a 60-foot city bus. You'll see examples here in this slide of our vehicles, the fleet of vehicles that we utilize, which comprise of retrofitted minivans, minibuses, ProMaster lifts, and one of the vehicles that we don't have here are just a standard sedan. So Transit Plus is a shared ride, a pre-booked service like Kevin has spoken to, where you have to book at least 1 day in advance. The service operates within the same geographical area as the conventional service. And transit employs occupational therapists to conduct assessments to determine the eligibility for those applying for Winnipeg Transit service. Therapists also assess for design and access to the vehicle, as well as pickup locations to deliver the service. So this is a point of intersection for our professions, looking at the technical problems of locations, looking at build designs, looking at where that cross-section of function and solutions can arise, and for the individuals who have to access them. And you can see in the master plan slides that Kevin was speaking to how challenging that is in terms of looking at all the factors that has to be considered. And certainly Kevin and I have gotten round on a few occasions on some of these challenging situations. In the past decade, Winnipeg Transit has enhanced passenger access with low floor buses that kneel to curb height, enabling access for individuals with disabilities and the equipment they may utilize. So the accessibility for wheelchairs, scooters, canes, walkers, for those accessing the conventional service. Where at one point, not so long ago, we saw a stark division of transportation services. So you'll see that in this slide of transit continuum and history, where at one point, these were very opposite on the spectrum of public transportation, where individuals with disabilities were specifically within the paratransit service and really couldn't access the conventional service because of the 3 large stairs that were required to access the conventional service at the time. So with the fully accessible features on our fleets at this time and other enhancements arising from the upcoming Accessibility for Manitobans Act, the transportation standards that are still in draft form, we do see the addition of bus operator assistance for wheelchair securements on conventional service. That's what you'll see in this one slide, where it demonstrates a fully automated system where this allows individuals flexibility, spontaneity, and choice in terms of what type of transportation they want to access to get from point A to point B where they need to go. And this really has changed the face of all of that because it is fully independent. An individual would access the bus, they would situate their chair in the specific location, be it manual, power, scooter. This is a rear-facing securement device. The individual would push a button on the side of the securement system, and this arm would fully deploy, and on both sides of the mobility device would apply pressure that the mobility device would not move within a 0.1 millimeter of movement in the event of a sudden brake or a turning application when the bus on a daily route. There's also other accessible bus features, bus stop announcements where individuals in that priority seating area can press a button and alert the bus operator that someone from the priority seating area is wanting to alight the bus, and that will allow the operator to know to just take a little bit more time and make sure that person is able to stand up from the seat and actually make their way to the front of the bus to exit. We have next stop announcements, whether that's interior or exterior, and of course that kneeling feature where the bus is able to kneel to the curb and then deploy the ramp, so it is a easy access onto the bus. With these developments, of course, again, what Kevin had highlighted in his presentation is that this provides the independence and the flexibility and the spontaneity of many individuals that never had that capacity in the not so distant past. So with the introduction of the Winnipeg Transit Master Plan, we will see an unprecedented transformation of the design and the realization of a new modernized public transportation model that uses its resources to its greatest potential, and really will change the face of service delivery and the customer service as we've known it to date. So, which is again, yet another point of intersection for our vocations and a great place to start conversations. So with that, I open it up to any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. One of the things I appreciate about transit planning is that there's a lot of emphasis on how transportation connects to other things that people want to do, and how the transportation system can give people access to opportunities and friends, and how it's really a quality of life thing. So it's great to see the different features that Winnipeg Transit has, and that are being planned to help extend that to more of the community. So that's great. Mm-hmm. We have a couple questions, and the first has to do with Graham Avenue. We had a couple people notice that the proposed plan that Kevin showed, and I think Bob might have shown it as well, does not include any service on Graham Avenue. So I'll send this one to Kevin first of all, and Bob and Graham, feel free to chip in. What's up with Graham Avenue?
No buses on Graham in the future. That's correct.
Can you comment on the thinking behind that?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. We don't really need it. We've realigned the downtown network. So, well, okay, why do we need Graham now, I guess might be the relevant question. The general structure of our network is that regardless of where our route comes from or goes to, it goes east-west through the middle of downtown on either Portage Avenue or Graham Avenue. almost every route, and every route that goes downtown goes east-west on one of those streets. But Winnipeg, the city, geographically, there's a lot more going on in the north and south than there is in the east and west. The desire line of travel is very often north-south across the city, let alone through, and that holds true through downtown. So it's quite inefficient for a number of reasons, but just for passengers riding the bus to go east-west through downtown when what they actually want to do is go north and south in a lot of cases. So and then the other thing is buses turn a lot downtown. Every time they turn, they have to yield to pedestrians. That adds up.
I think we lost Kevin.
We're the proposed new network to. Did you lose me?
Yeah, you're coming in and out on audio, Kevin.
I'm just going
If
to
you
keep
want to
going.
try pausing your webcam.
Okay. Well, I didn't do anything different, so. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. We had you with buses encountering
Okay, no more.
crosswalks when they make turning movements.
Right. Okay. So we really tried to straighten that out. All right, can you guys still hear me? There's something weird going on my screen.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, I'll just keep going. Okay, the people want to go north-south. So the new network has straight line routes down, Osborne, Memorial Colony, Balmoral, Isabel, Salter, that one street. And then it has straight line routes that go up and down Donald and Smith, which splits into King and Princess on the one hand and Cumberland and Notre Dame on the other. But, those are sort of Winnipeg straight north-south lines. And then also straight up and down Main Street, we have rapid transit. None of that's currently possible. You can't go from Sargent and Balmoral to Osborne and Broadway at all on a bus without meandering through downtown and transferring. But that's like 6 blocks down the same street. So we've drawn a route that does that, well, 2 actually. There will be a bus every 5 to 7 minutes doing that from William to to Confusion Corner, actually, on Osborne and its other names. On Main Street until April 2020, there was no bus available to go from Union Station to City Hall. And in the future network, we'd have a bus doing that every 2 minutes. And on Donald and Smith, right now, or in 2019, we had a bus about every half an hour going up and down Donald and Smith. In the proposed network, we have a bus every 5 minutes. So the first implication is just stopping forcing everything to go east-west when it really wants to go north-south. And then the second thing is that naturally Portage Avenue is extremely important, and the downtown portion of Portage Avenue is possibly the most important single segment of street in the transit network. But we wouldn't have so many buses on it that we would need it and another parallel route 1 block away. So then the question could be, well, should we continue to use Graham but leave Portage? But no, because that's rapid transit, and our mandate on rapid transit is to design it in a way that's compatible with conversion to LRT in the future. You can't get an LRT train to navigate the intersection of Graham and Vaughan, which is the west end of Graham. It's too tight. You could do it, but it would be at its max or minimum radius to do it at Main Street and Graham, and only if it went to the far side of Main Street. So we were looking at that kind of constraint. And then, for as long as it remains a bus system, buses need to yield to pedestrians. if we have a route that goes every 5 minutes, and if it takes 60 seconds to yield to all the pedestrians, you know, which downtown being full of pedestrians normally, not right now probably, you know, that might happen. So 5 turns means we need to buy another bus just for that route, and compound that, multiply that by every route that goes everywhere downtown. And we're spending an enormous portion of our current budget turning corners downtown. And we're freeing up those resources, and that's what gives us the ability to introduce frequent network citywide.
That's great. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Nope, nothing.
Sure. Okay, so if Graham Avenue, it's losing the buses, does that mean that it's opened to general traffic?
No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It remains a bike route. It's a bike route today, and it remains a bike route. It would probably be a little bit better of a bike route if it didn't have so many buses on it. But the real answer is that there's going to be a series of studies covering implications of this study, implications of the Transit Master Plan, but also other Transportation Master Plan. The planning department has their own studies going on. And so the question of what happens on Graham is going to be solved through these other studies that are more multidisciplinary in their nature. And Transit Master Plan isn't the appropriate venue for answering that question.
Great, great. So this question is open to all the presenters. Can you comment on how the on-request service areas will work?
Yeah, we have those already, sort of. We have 3 DART, dial-a-ride transit, service areas right now. There, one in St. Boniface, one in Southdale, or the greater Southdale area, and another one in the St. Amant area that operate at various times of the day. The way they work today is you have to phone the bus driver with an actual phone. The bus driver will answer an actual phone. Ideally, they will pull over to do that. And you tell the bus driver where you want to get picked up and where you want to get dropped off, and the bus driver figures out a route to optimize all the pickups and drop-offs that have been requested. There's a significant capacity limitation with that method, and paradoxically, the more people that want to use the service, the lower the capacity, because the bus driver needs to spend more time on the phone and less time driving. So, and you know, people who are, I don't know, I'll say 40 and under, kind of don't use phones, right? So we cater to some demographics, but it doesn't work very well. The concept of on request is to take that same idea, but replace the routing with software. So people would use an app to book a trip. The people that don't have access to a computer could call someone in a customer service center who would basically use the app for them. But one way or the other, the ride requests come in through an app. Then software optimizes the routing, and the driver has a screen telling them to turn left, turn right, and that, you know, just like a GPS unit in a car, but it's updating in almost real time, about 60 seconds in advance. Using that system, that type of system, other cities have found that they can generally serve requests within 15 minutes, where right now on our DART system, on some of the busier ones, on some of the busier days, you might need to book at 9 in the morning to get a ride at 2 p.m. So we'd be going from a highly variable and uncertain range of trip accommodation timeline to about a 5 to 15 minute window if it works as expected. The other thing that's really critical that customers won't notice necessarily, but we will, since you're not phoning a bus driver, we can put more than one vehicle in the service area. Right now, we can't do that. No matter how busy it gets, it has to just be one vehicle because there's only one phone number to phone. So that would let us handle the peaks. If there end up being peaks of demand in those areas, we could send another vehicle out there or combine areas and make several vehicles, which there's a nonlinear relationship between the efficiency and the number of vehicles, as in more vehicle, like doubling the number of vehicles better than doubles the efficiency of the system. Like it's nonlinear in that direction. And so that's where we want to go, and why.
Great. So yeah, really just increasing the flexibility and the capacity and the efficiency of the system.
Yeah, in what we think, and this will remain to be proven, but we believe or are hopeful that people will find on request to actually be the best feeder route. Because if you can request the bus and it'll come in 5 to 15 minutes, if the next step, I'm using air quotes, up in the hierarchy is a half-hourly bus, then you would consider that to be a demotion. The problem is that there's a capacity limitation there. We expect that at some point we'll have to promote some on-request service areas to fixed route service, and that
Right.
some people may think that that's worse. But right now, because nobody has experience, or no one in Winnipeg has experience with that, we've gotten a lot of comments saying, why do I only get this on-request service in my area? And so we're planning to roll that out pretty quickly. That'll be one of the first steps that we take if this is approved, or even independently of that, since we have the DART already. We really need to test out that technology and see if we can achieve the same results that other cities have achieved.
Right. So once the plan is approved, assuming that it is approved by council, what are the next steps?
Oh, so many steps. Yeah, it is a master plan. So it is really, creating and having a to-do list approved. That's really what this is. So on the service plan side, we would have to start an implementation plan. We want to roll this out in a 2 to 5 year period, if that's what's approved. It's going to be incredibly complicated. Edmonton went through a similar thing. They were 4 years between approval and launch. They're launching on April 25th of this year, their new network. We might take a slightly different approach, but you can imagine that if you have a company with 1,000 employees and they're all paid by the minute, and you need to figure out how to make shift schedules for those 1,000 employees, that's going to be complicated, and those shifts need to start and end at a certain bus stop, where there's a place for them to wait and ideally a bathroom and stuff like that. It's just incredibly, incredibly complicated to do that. And we will be spending the next year, at least, figuring out how to do that with a new network, and but the extra complicating part being that we want to do it in phases. So we need a plan for years 2, 3, 4, and 5, and that plan needs to get down to the level of detail of what time our bus driver, or each of the 1,000 bus drivers showing up to work each day. So that's going to be the big effort on our end. And then on the customer facing side, we've said that the primary transit network is, if council approves it, we're going to consider the primary transit network to be pretty fixed. Only very minor changes to the primary transit network would ever happen, other than extensions as the city grows, but we want it to be permanent. We want people to make real estate decisions based on it. Our colleagues at planning department are developing land use policies around the primary transit network to allow higher densities along that and different policies like that. So the primary transit network, we intend to be a permanent fixture of the city. The feeder network, however, has the opposite intent. We want it to be flexible, and as communities grow and change, those feeder routes would change along with the neighborhoods, and that also includes between approval of the master plan and implementation. So we've done a lot of engagement, and Bob covered or put a number on the screen for how much engagement we did, but you can't at a citywide scale engage on questions like where should the bus stop go in front of this particular school, and so we need to get into that level of engagement, and that's what we would be doing. And then there's the rapid transit component, which none of us talked about very much, but that's a whole series of major projects for functional design, preliminary design, detailed design, and procurement. And then how many phases of expansion will we have? It could be anywhere between 1 and 25 phases. It's just a function of how much funding becomes available. We've broken it down into 4 general high-level priorities, but those, other than the first one, which kind of has to be one chunk, and that's the downtown, the rest is scalable and could match budgets. So we'll be in a sort of constant cycle of looking at what our funding opportunities might be over the next 5 to 7 years, and then figuring out what we should be designing and to what extent or what depth we should be designing it, and then undertaking those designs. And then there's the rapid transit, the Winnipeg Transit Plus integration. And I talked about junctions, and Teresa talked about how revolutionary this will be, or unprecedented it'll be for improving the transportation needs of those customers. But we need to build the infrastructure for that. Can't just arbitrarily drop people off in a ditch in a wheelchair and have them transfer onto conventional service. So the list is long. The master plan is just the first step.
Great. So with about 3 minutes left, our final question is related to the BRT system and goals around ridership growth. We talked a lot about efficiency and flexibility. What kind of goals are in place for growth in ridership as part of the master plan?
At this point with the COVID pandemic, goals are kind of meaningless. No one knows in the whole world what's going to happen to transit ridership now. We know it's going to grow back differently. We also strongly believe it's going to grow back, but we don't know what differently means. So we're not in a position to be able to set goals, but what we are in a position to do is establish capacities and then try to make that attractive to be utilized. So the zero net operating cost transformation of the network is so much more efficient that we would have the capacity to welcome back our pre-COVID ridership and a significant growth. With the long-term plan, Stantec estimated about a 25% capacity increase, which will get, I don't know what the capacity increase on the short-term network is, but it would be a big chunk of the way to that 25% at no operating cost. So, and then the frequent network being expanded to almost triple the number of households is that way of encouraging and welcoming those people to come use transit. It'll just be so much easier than it ever has been in the past. And then our climate action plan, which of course was developed before COVID, talks about doubling the number of per capita trips. So if we were going to have a goal, that's the one, and that was established in a different plan 3 years ago.
If I can, what we used for our modeling of the downtown, and that'll be another presentation maybe in a little while, is we made the assumption that all future growth would basically be handled by the increased capacity in transit. That's not saying that anybody new is going to jump to transit, but people are going to change their mode of choice, and traffic volumes, like the single vehicle volumes, will essentially stay stagnant. So that's the assumption we made. We'll see where it goes.
That's a pretty common assumption, I think, for downtowns. I mean, big city downtowns are full of cars. They can't fit more cars, right? So transit is the tool that all cities eventually turn to accommodate that growth in their most constrained areas, and that's exactly what we're proposing.
Nice. Well, that brings us to 2:30. So I'd like to thank Kevin and Graham and Bob and Teresa for their time and sharing their expertise and experience on the Transit Master Plan. And I look forward to seeing how it shakes out over the coming years. And thank you to everyone for attending. And stay tuned for more news and future events from the Manitoba section. Thank you.
Thanks,
Stephen. Thanks for organizing this, and maybe next time we can do it face to face.
That would be great. Yeah, looking forward to that. Thanks, everyone.
All right,
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.